1 o'clock. Thank you everyone for coming on such short notice. Just a way of starting off the meeting. So this is a continuation of a board discussion on Tuesday to talk about options for kindergarten next year. We're going to do this a little different than your normal study session. Larry has a couple things to say, and then Tim Pertell has asked for the opportunity with some other folks to address the board, which we would love to support, and I'm going to see if anyone else in the audience would like the same opportunity as well. So,
okay, yeah, so I'll start. So just kind of a recap and some of the things I covered yesterday. I just wanted to provide some context for this whole issue. So we've always known for the last couple of years that under the best of circumstances, 2016 and 17 was going to be our most challenging year dealing with enrollment growth in the district prior to opening up North Creek, implementing boundary adjustments and implementing grade reconfiguration that are going to provide some much needed relief. That challenge of 2016-17 became a little bit more complicated this summer when at the end of the third special legislative session in the middle of July, the final budget provided the option for full-day kindergarten in districts a year earlier than anticipated. In 16-17, full-day kindergarten had been on our radar as a 17-18 requirement and aligned very nicely with all of the other changes we had in mind for 17 and 18. So we immediately began talking about that and recognized that this injected another layer of challenge and complexity into our planning for 16 and 17. We engaged the board with some initial thoughts that we had and some initial models of how we might be able to look at 16, 17, because we immediately recognized an equity issue, that our current understanding of the rules from the state is you could only get state funding for full-day kindergarten if you could provide full-day kindergarten for all of the students out of school. And our schools in our district that have capacity in 16, 17 for all the children to have full-day kindergarten are primarily our East Side elementary schools, which are arguably of lesser need than our more impacted schools in other places in the district where we're experiencing overcrowding and we have kindergarten students who aren't attending their neighborhood schools, etc. So when we met with the board on 2 occasions in October, I think we achieved a couple of things. One is I think we eliminated some options that were not acceptable to the board. One of those being we had modeled what would half-day kindergarten district-wide in 16-17 look like, and I think there was agreement that was a non-starter. And the board expressed preference for a couple of different models of the 5 or 6 that we had shared, and then outlined, I think, some key elements of what they would hope to see in a final solution. And again, we looked at these on Tuesday, and as we look at these and review these and actually model these in particular options, they all present varying levels of trade-offs. And that's what we as an administrative group have been wrestling with over the last couple of months as we've been deep into this issue, is assessing and responding to those various trade-offs. So on Tuesday, when we came back, and well, let me back up one more thing. So one of the other things, as I mentioned, that had changed between October, well actually between summer and now, was our understanding of what the state would fund in full-day kindergarten. And so again, our initial understanding was unless you could have the whole school receiving full-day kindergarten, you couldn't get state funding. Since October, although still unofficial, but sort of official because of the back channel communication we have with OSBI, we know that we will be able to receive state funding even for our hybrid programs, even for our schools where we can't offer full-day kindergarten to all students. So that further injected another variable in our plan. So working with the directions we had received from the board in October, again recognizing that they represent different trade-offs, we had presented 4 different plans for the board to consider on Tuesday. Plans 3 and 4 rely on a modified class size ratio, so essentially increasing class sizes to reduce the demand for classrooms in a building, still deploying the teachers, but teachers without classes to sort of backfill that need. Plans 1 and 2 are different iterations of continuation of sort of the mitigation efforts we've been employing over the last couple of years. The biggest difference between those two being Plan 1 would utilize the Northshore Primary Center, Plan 2 would not. Plan 2 would require more portables. Plan 1 would require a number of portables, but fewer than Plan 1. So those are sort of the major differences. With most of you that are sitting around the table here tonight, we've had the conversation over the last several weeks that Plans 3 and 4 would be stretches for our community, both from the standpoint of teachers and the impact to teachers with larger classes, parents and parent concerns, dissatisfaction with larger classes for their children, and the general infrastructure concerns of the school, because Plan 4 in particular brings more students to the school all day long than half day, if you still had some half day programs where some of the kids would be there in the morning and some of the kids would be there in the afternoon. And so it's been my belief, and I've talked about it with several of you here, that we would need sufficient support from both parents and teachers to implement Plans 3 or 4. And I don't think any of us believe we would get support in the traditional sense of the word for larger classes, but would there be sufficient recognition of the benefit of the trade-off, particularly on Plan 4, where we could offer full-day kindergarten to all students in the district? And our belief, and my conversation with many here, that if we didn't have that sufficient level of support, Plans 3 or 4 were likely not supportable. So as I communicated to the board earlier today, I know you've been hearing from a number of teachers and from a number of parents across the district regarding Plans 3 or 4. I appreciate the input people have provided. I think it's been very respectful and appropriate and helpful. It is my belief that there is not and will not be sufficient support for Plans 3 or 4. So I would ask that the board not consider either of those options and focus your attention on Plans 1 and 2. And although it's maybe backing up a little bit, I know that one of the requests on Tuesday was to sort of model what Plan 4 or 3 or 4 might look like across schools, and I know we've done that, and these are averages, and Jeff can explain a little bit more if you're interested about how those were derived. And then we've got a second document. I don't know if people have it yet, but
I just wanted to mention I found that very helpful to get the breakdown by school, so thank you for taking time.
And the second document that Jeff can hand out is shows a similar analysis, similar class size averages currently. And so this is hot off the press this morning, but it does further illustrate, at least from a modeling standpoint, kind of what the differences would look like from current to what this potential model would look like.
Is it just one version?
Yeah, the data for 14-15 was going to take quite a bit of cleanup, and I didn't
no
have to do it. So we were able to do 15-16.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
So does anyone have any questions or from the table for Larry?
And
Before I move on to seeing who would like
thank
to.
you for indulging the long model.
Well, I just want to go back really quick. I brought information, but now it looks like it's not necessary of a board meeting that we had, or a study session that we had October 13th that you two were not a part of. And I wanted to make sure that we got up to speed. I didn't know how much you guys knew about that board meeting, and I also spent about 2 hours this morning going over the video of the October 13th study session. I'm very grateful that those were videotaped, so that I could actually see what the board directives were and what actually had been said by all of us, and some things I had forgotten and some things I think we'd all forgotten, which is normal for our memory, which is why I was thankful to go back and refresh my memory. But one thing about the resource teachers, and I do have a question about this, is there's a slide, if you go back to what the board directives are. The current board directives that says, explore creative and alternative use of teaching and support staff to create classroom space. That is one of the areas of board direction that I was having pushback on at the other study session. And when I went back to the videos, what was brought up was, I think Kathleen or yourself brought up that in some of our overcrowded schools, possibly Kokanee and Fernwood, there may need to be the use of a resource teacher with the hybrid model. And the board asked questions about that and what that meant. And Kathleen said, not trying to F you, but you said that this was not ideal, and there was consensus that this was not an ideal prescriptive for a way to administer the next year even in that situation, but that if we had to do it in a couple of those schools versus moving students around, to avoid moving too many students around, then the board was like, we don't like that, but we're okay with those couple of schools. But to extend it to that that the board was giving directive to model this out across the whole district, I feel was not what came out of that meeting. And so that's where I was having the pushback on option 4. And that's what, so I do want to ask.
We can make a note of that.
Yeah, I would like that removed from what the board direction was, because I think that was where I was having a lot of that. And then I would also like to ask Larry and Kathleen, since you were part of that discussion, in this current, and Ryan, in this current model that we're talking about, will we be using resource teachers? Because my understanding is that a couple of the overcrowded schools, the potential for using a resource teacher is a possibility.
So what I'd like to do, Kimberly, if you can hold that thought, I had offered up to Tim and anyone else who wants to the opportunity to, at the beginning, address their concerns before we start getting into
You
details.
asked if I had a question.
I know, but that sounded like that sounded more like a discussion, or, you know what I mean, that could be a very detailed, and I
Sure,
don't want
not
to
a
start going and getting into the substance of the proposal before we give folks the opportunity to speak. If that's all right, if you can just hold
Yeah.
on to that, I appreciate it. So Tim, if you'd like to start.
Thank you. Besides myself, I also have 3 other teachers here with me today. Tim Rhodes from Crystal Spring is a member of my exec board. Kim Rodriguez from Wooden, also a member of my exec board. And Celia Wilson from West Hill, a member of our table bargaining team. A letter is coming around that was sent to all of the board members today via email, and was sent also to the teaching staff that I represent. A number of things. First of all, thank you for allowing the time to speak very much. It's greatly appreciated. I look at the directions that you set up for the district administration to work by. And I would say that option 2 does this to the best of its ability. Now, when we say minimize the number of students that have to move, that means you might have to move quite a few, but make it as little as you can. Or Director Smith, the other night you were talking about the number of opportunities this would create for kindergarten children in terms of full day camp. It does create those opportunities. But I would counter that statement with the number of opportunities it takes away from children in all the other grade levels because of the overcrowding that we're already experiencing and that this would just simply add to. Option 2 carries with it a very high capital cost in buying portables and trying to site those portables. And it was referred to as portables that we only use for 1 year, that we'll only need for 1 year. But I challenge that assumption. If you've been to Leota Junior High, I know Nancy Chamberlain has been there, and if you step outside the gymnasium at Leota Junior High, you'll find 2 portables. I taught starting in 1989 at Leota Junior High. Those 2 portables were already there. And those 2 portables were already falling apart in 1989. And they are still there, and they are still falling apart. One of the portables still sited at Leota, out in the other part of the portable complex. One day, I was moving books on a cart near the back door of my portable, leading to my ramp so that I could get it out. Not only did the ramp collapse, but the entire back corner of the portable collapsed, to the point where that summer it had to be jacked up and refoundation poured under that corner. That portable is still there. So these are portables that we would buy, but we could also then use these portables if they're not needed at the locations that they're first sited at. And yes, I understand that there are costs associated with siting and placing a portable. But if that portable is not used, we can use these portables to replace the decrepit, old, falling apart, moldy portables that are still being used on our school campuses around the district. It's not a use it 1 year and it's a waste of money. We can repurpose these portables and use them again in places where we absolutely need them. And if anybody is going to be foolish enough to think that the growth in the North Shore School District is over, it's not. We will continue to grow, and most likely, we will still need these portables. As your own studies have stated, if McCleary is fully implemented in this state, in this district, when the McCleary money comes through, we are 4 to 5 schools short of needed classroom space. Those portables can help us during that time that hopefully the state legislature will start sending more capital improvement money to school districts so that they can build the necessary floor space to implement the classroom mandates that are in the McCleary decision. It's not a 1 year use and then a waste of $4 million. We can reuse these portables again, and we should reuse them again, over and over and over again. And I wish we didn't have to use them over again. But even if we didn't, we could resell them. We're not going to recoup $250,000. We know that. But we would recoup something, some part of that initial investment, if we truly believe that we're not going to need them. If you truly believe that these classroom numbers that were distributed on the yellow and green sheet, these are best estimates. And I want to underscore the word estimate. And I believe they were brought to you in good faith as estimates. The problem with the numbers is we can't predict, as Tim Rhodes experiences at Crystal Springs, how many kids continue to enroll in that school every single day. Not every other day, but almost virtually every single day. Nor do these numbers reflect what's currently in our collective bargaining agreement around the weighting of particular students in our class that demand more attention because of their unique learning needs. So, while the numbers appear on your page to be an estimate, I'm going to counter that they are a low estimate because there are other factors that have to be brought into play here. We talk about hiring teachers that we're going to need. I want us to wrap our brains around the same thing that the news media did in the last 2 weeks. The teacher shortage crisis isn't a looming crisis that's going to occur. The teacher shortage crisis, we are a year into it, right now. We can't hire right now all the teachers we need because they don't exist. And if we increase class sizes at Fernwood, I'll just take Fernwood as an example. I can tell you now from my conversations with teachers at Fernwood, they will quit. They will quit and they will go to Snohomish, they'll go to Edmonds, they'll go to anywhere else around us to work because they refuse to work in that school under the pressures that that staff is having to endure today. Not what they would perceive those pressures to be in the future when we increase their class sizes even more. It's a no-win situation. So the teacher shortage, it's not something that's coming, it's here right now. And we need to understand that it is here right now. I implore you to look at a hybrid of option 1 and 2, if need be. Option 3 and 4, as you have heard from the teaching staff, they are not interested in that in any way, shape, or form. I believe that you as a board, I'm going to encourage you from some things that I heard at the study session. We arrived here because all the voices that should have been taken into consideration back in October when this was first being discussed were not allowed into this conversation. We're not even invited into this conversation. And if we had been invited in, you would have heard our objection then. And perhaps we wouldn't be here at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on a Thursday, me having to expend our resources to pull my teachers away for half days when they want to be with their students. But they believe in protecting not just their students, but all students and their colleagues from what they perceive to be ideas that would have had horrible impacts on student learning. So thank you very much for the
I
opportunity.
have a question for you.
Kim.
So on Plan 1, I just want to understand your distinction between Plan 2 and Plan 1. So on Plan 1, were the idea is to move the kids to, that you can correct me if I'm not saying this right, the idea is to move the kids to utilize our primary center. We will still be buying, I believe, 10 portables, 11 portables versus 16, but we'll be utilizing a resource that we have currently available and that we purposed at one point to house children. So my question is, what in Plan 1 is it that has you give a preference over Plan 2? I mean, what in Plan 2 is preference over Plan 1? Because I think it's just moving the kids to primary center, correct?
That's my understanding.
Yeah. I wish we didn't have to use, I wish we'd never entered into an agreement for a primary center because I think we're getting ripped off. I wish the board would take legal action against the church and get out of the fact that we're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on a property that realistically we can't use. I'd sue the church for failure to fulfill their end of a contract that was signed with the district. But if we have to use the primary center for half-day K, begrudgingly, okay. I'd rather not. But if we have to, we have to. I think that's a lesser evil than some of the other things that are included in the other plans.
I think the difference in 210 is also the number of kids moving.
Yeah,
There's less than.
there's less kids moving. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Yeah, I just wanted
And
to know
I'd
your
like to
objection.
minimize the number of the kids moving.
I just wanted to know your objections to that one.
Yeah. But again, if some kids have to move, our parents have already wrapped their mind around what's going on.
Yeah.
And that there's kids moving now. And I think it wouldn't be that much of a stretch from what they've experienced. The other thing I'd like to close with just briefly is not until, I appreciate all the work that you guys do talking to legislators about McCleary. The constituency group we need to focus on in terms of our McCleary conversation is our parents. Engaging them at a much deeper level. We can have a conversation once with them, but then we have to follow it up and give them concrete examples such as this. This is a perfect example of what the state is doing to every single school district. They're forcing us into discussions and arguments that would evaporate if they would pay what the courts have ordered them to pay. And I need you as board members to formulate a plan, an action plan around engaging our community on McCleary. Because until you do that, the courts will continue to ignore the superintendents, the board directors, the teachers that go down to Olympia every single year and say the same thing to them. I lobby with a mainstream Republican every year. Why? Because I want them to see that we're not divided, that we believe the exact same thing. They're not paying for what they should be paying for. And I need you guys to be the champions, to organize our community around this. This is something that can bring all of us together around a very important common cause for the good of all. And I encourage you strongly that that should be something that you discuss at your upcoming board retreat. Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, I have a question.
I'm sorry,
I
Ken.
want to,
I'm sorry,
so,
Ken.
and for me, I appreciate the arguing for a position. I'm trying to get the content.
Right on.
So the content I got was portables can be repurposed.
Yes, sir.
The teacher shortage is now.
Yes, sir.
NPC needs to be examined.
Yep,
And McCleary and parents.
yep.
Your first point, I'm not sure I got at what your bullet point was in your opening item, or were those the four major
That's
items?
it.
Thank you very
You got
much.
it.
There was class size.
Class
That was
sizes.
The first kind of main
Yeah.
topic.
Okay, thank you. I just want to get that part of it. And
We are so far beyond McCleary right now.
I understand, I want to get the content. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tim Rose, I'm the teacher of the Springs, and so the first thing I want to say is thank you very much for taking options 3 and 4 off the board, off the table, because for us, coming from the school of the Springs, people who know me, I'm very passionate about teaching, sometimes I get myself in trouble that way, but the thing is, I will do anything to help my kids. Matter of fact, I'll do it at the expense of me, as far as time in classrooms, doing things. As a matter of fact, I told the kids yesterday, I'm going to be gone in the afternoon because I need to stand up for you, to tell you how to protect our school, because our school is one of those overcrowded schools. We have no classrooms. We literally, I saw there earlier, talked about things like opening up, what was that, I think it was like computer labs. We already did that. We don't have any computer labs. We had to get rid of all those things. All those extra programs, those things we had, there's no space left. So yeah, we could add teachers, but the problem is going to come down to the class size and as far as where you're going to put people. The only way I can see us ever working anything other than land 1 or 2 is literally having to move another population of children out of our schools it is. We already don't have kindergarten. We have 6 grades, 6 first grades, 6 second grades, 5 third grades, 4 and 4. Whereas I've been at this school for a long time. I came to Northshore as a really proud person. When I first came out 30-something years ago, over 30 years ago, I came out knowing that Northshore was one of the top districts in the state, and I ended up waiting for 2 years and subbing to get in. Not taking jobs for other places because I knew that I wanted to be in Northshore. Okay? The problem right now is, what I find that's happening is, it feels to me that some of the schools in the north end, it almost feels like it's almost punitive. When it comes down to things like this, we don't have the population, we have the population, we don't have the facilities to be able to support all-day kindergarten. I don't know how that's going to look at our school. I have no idea. I have ideas that you might look into, I don't know, but the problem is, I don't know how that's not going to impact families, and it's not going to impact students. And for me, that upsets me, because I do not like to be out of my classroom. I hate being out of my classroom, okay? Because that's where my job is, that's my calling, that's why I'm there. Okay, every time I'm out of the classroom, or every time I have too many students, which is often, it takes away from my ability to make connections, to build on those students, to figure out, take the time to sit down and talk with them, to figure out what's going on, why they're having troubles understanding how to multiply fractions, or how to read and comprehend things. That's my job, that's my mission, okay? And I look at education as more than simply passing some sort of assessment, it's understanding, it's preparing them for life. And what I look at as a kindergarten is I understand that we want to give opportunities to kindergarten for all day, but at the same time, I look at how is that going to affect everybody else. I like to look at the whole picture, and for you all, I'm hoping, I woke up in the middle of the night thinking about this, thinking, okay, I'm looking at more from the relational point of view and the philosophical point of view than the actual logistics. I figure you're gonna figure out the logistics, but from my point of view, I think of it as this. I'm the oldest son of 4 boys. As a oldest brother, it's my job to keep the brothers in line and kind of watch out for them and protect them. I see the school board as that same metaphor. Your job is to watch out for all the children in your district, not just a certain population of them. And I look at the those North End students, my population, who probably 2/3 or more come from departments along Rutherford Highway. Our population is constantly changing. I saw those estimates. I don't think those are even remotely close for us, because things change so often, so quickly, that there's no way of predicting what's going to happen. So what I look at is from the point of view from all of you is I'm hoping that you're watching out for all the schools in the district, not just the ones on one side or the other, but making sure that whatever you do is that big brother or big sister, you're making sure you consider all these things to make sure what's going to be the least amount of impact, not only the bottom line as far as the fiscal, the dollar things, but on the families, those relationships, those ability for teachers. Because the teachers I know, we care deeply about children. We wouldn't be in teaching. I know a lot of teachers, including myself, that sometimes just think, this is not worth it. What's the point? It's really frustrating. I know a lot of teachers have gone to Snohomish. They've gone up to teach in Snohomish. They've gone other places. And so the point of this is I want to make sure that whatever you do, that you watch out for us. And my last point I want to say was this. I'm still not quite sure why we're doing kindergarten next year, all day kindergarten. We don't necessarily we don't have to do it. And in my own mind, I'm thinking, why can't it just wait until the whole reconfiguration and let things kind of fall as they may? I think that way things will kind of take care of themselves. That's from my perspective as a North End school. But my suggestion, my option, I would hope to be that people could maybe just say, let's just wait a year and do it in the 17-18 year.
How many kids do you currently have in your class?
I have 25. That's the smallest I've been in probably
What
8
was
years.
last year?
28.
And what grade did you, I'm sorry?
No, because that was what I was going to ask, what grade?
This year it's 5th grade. I've taught 3rd through 6th grade the last 32 years, including a number of splits and things. My class was switched the 2 days before school started because of how numbers shifted. That happens almost every year. So,
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And a point of information,
Yes.
so this is a board meeting, with all due respect, it's a study session.
Yes.
And I did not participate in the decision to have additional viewpoints. And so I had other plans to go to another school to do a visit, and so I want
Oh.
to make sure we hear everything we need to hear.
Okay.
There's a lot of people who we have as constituents in this
Right.
district, and this process was not necessarily open to say, hey, there's going to be citizen comments at this meeting. So, and I don't know if there was a bunch more people that are going to talk to us before the board gets down to what we plan to do in our study session. So I just wanted to
Yeah.
ask a point of
Sure,
information,
absolutely.
what's next?
So this was something that Tim had requested this morning.
Mhm.
And so in our policy for audience participation, it is at the discretion of the board and board president to decide how a board meeting is run. So I wanted to acknowledge their desire to speak. What we can do for your logistical purposes is maybe ask for a show of hands of folks who are interested in speaking, so we can get an idea of schedule.
Right, and new information is helpful. Other things, I think we've gotten a lot of information, and it's probably time for the board to start doing this. So if there's new information, I'm happy to hear it. If it's not new information, I'd like the board to get down to its work.
Well, it's.
And I don't mean to.
I understand what you're saying, and I
Okay.
appreciate that you invited people in,
Just to
so I'm appreciative of it.
wasn't able to get in touch with
Okay, so can I just ask a show of hands of who would like to
Oh.
provide comments?
Oh,
So I don't know if Josh was
Thank you.
able to get you on.
No, I hadn't heard
Okay,
that.
okay, thank you very much. So we have 3 more people interested in making some comments.
Okay.
So, sure, so maybe just.
I want to
comments-
hear them, but I suppose, you know what I'm, yeah, thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Okay, so Tiffany, I believe?
Hi everyone, my name's Kimberly. I teach dual language 5th grade over at Wooden Elementary. Just want to give you a little bit of background. I taught in San Bernardino, and my class size there was 34 students every year for 7 years. So 5th grade, 34 students. I came here to Northshore. I'm so lucky that my class size is not nearly that high. It's not even in the 30s right now. I just want to share the beauty that has occurred in the teaching with smaller class size. I get to have relationships with these students that I want to know for the rest of my life. I really get to build these relationships and new connections and really just get to know them in order to have a strong relationship with their teacher so that they want to learn. And I really, really love that. I really, really love that. So I'm glad that the class sizes are not going to be increasing. Also, I just wanted to give personal experience I went to the ghetto schools in San Bernardino and Rialto in Southern California, and I just felt like my parents counted on us being in school. They counted on us being in school so that they can go to work and get food on the table, pay for the roof over our heads. So when all-day kinder does get implemented, if for next year, those schools with low socioeconomic status, lots of, Title I schools, that they really do get the priority with that, because those parents really count on those kids being inside the classroom where they're safe and with another adult and just really being there. And yeah, I just wanted to keep it short.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's very helpful.
Okay, hi, I'm Celia Wilson. I'm one of the bargaining members, and I've been teaching in North Shore at West Hill for about 31 years.
Nice.
And what I wanted to do at first was bring you into what it looks like to have lunch at West Hill today during a very serious conversation about all this. But I'll skip it because, it's personal opinions and things like that, and I realize you've got business to take care of. If you want to hear it, I'll be glad to share. But let me just share one thought with you. And that is, when I started, I taught kindergarten, and I had 32 children and 30 in the morning and 32 children in the afternoon. And to this day, I still remember saying to myself, teaching's easy, it's a piece of cake. But kids came ready to learn, and that's what we've got to remember, people. We've got to know that when kids come ready to learn, you can have those higher numbers. So it's really not about the numbers, it's about readiness. Are kids ready to learn in this kind of a setting? They don't come ready to learn today. And I experienced last year a group of 29 third graders. And I mean, it was my hardest year ever. And I was never so glad to be older in my life and ready to retire. Now that's sad, because I remember saying, 4th grade forever, I'm never gonna stop teaching. I mean, those were the good old days. But I'm just so sad today. These are not the good old days, people. And I come from 2 parents who taught in North Shore for their careers. I went to Canyon Park when it opened. I mean, I love Buckville. I will never leave it. And people have asked me to run for the school board. And I said, oh my gosh, these people are real service providers. You guys in the school board, I mean, you don't get paid for this. You do this because you care about service. And that's your motive. Well, I'm asking you today to examine your motive and to just think about what would a win-win look like. And I'm going to second Tim here. A win-win would be if you would be willing to hold off 1 more year. And then the big change happens, and Tim, I think your statement was perfect. The hard things, the hard decisions that people are needing to make today will hopefully take care of themselves in that new setting. So thank you for listening.
And Nancy, did you have to say?
Nancy Chamberlain, representing North Shore PTSA Council today. And first, thank you, Amy, for giving us all the opportunity to speak. It was tough sitting there for 3 hours on Tuesday and not being able to say anything. So I spent the majority of yesterday and the morning communicating with parents and PTA leaders at affected schools. And I want to thank Larry for taking plans 3 and 4 off the table, because really that was the pushback I was hearing, that the class size increase was not a good trade-off to give, even though everyone wants and knows that full-day kindergarten is valuable to those kids, especially vulnerable kids. And you will get voices saying, how could you take this back? More parents were concerned about the class sizes, because some of those schools are already bursting inside classrooms. So thank you for that. I walked out Tuesday night thinking, oh, 4, we'll go with 4. Everyone's on board with 4. And then I looked at the numbers again, and I said, no, we can't impact 10,000 plus kids that way. So I walked in today saying 1, plan 1, let's do it. But, you know, Tim has a point about the expenditure of the portables, if we can procure that many, not being a waste of money. So, you know, plans 1 and 2 to me have trade-offs, cost versus moving more kids around, and the logistics really are things that you guys can work on. But as far as parent voice, I would say plans 1 or 2, and moving less kids is probably a better idea if we can swing the portables.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
for-
you.
for
I
speaking.
appreciate your voices.
And Amy, if I may, since we have them here, I have kind of a follow-up question I think is one of the critical items we're going to discuss.
Absolutely.
Okay, so Mr. Patel and Mr. Chamberlain, so the question I have is the question about equity. And so one of the big questions that people have had is, if we go with some half-day, which the models 1 and 2 have some half-day, should we basically fill up every school with as much full day as that school can handle, knowing that some parts of the district don't get full day?
Yes.
Okay, so that's pretty much the sense you're hearing, and so then the inequity that, and I want to say this in a way that's a little harsh, just so that the inequity that you're supporting is some kids in the crowdedest schools right now don't get full day kindergarten. You're comfortable with that trade, because there's all the trade-offs, but that's the worst part of 1 and 2. And if your sense is that on the whole, that's less worse than crowding 1 through 6 even more, if that's where families, you're hearing from parents and you're hearing from teachers, and I'm not trying to be mean about that, I just want to sense that if that's the messaging that people are comfortable with, if that's what you're kind of have a sense of, that's useful for us.
With one caveat.
Yeah.
And that is what you've heard, and that is that all children who are on free and reduced lunch, any Title child, they are moved to the front of the list.
So do a prioritization.
For all day K.
Okay.
If they take up all the spots for all day K, so be it.
Okay.
Anything after all of the neediest children being placed in all day K, then go to a lottery.
Go to a lottery
flip,
for the.
however you want to.
Okay.
But it has to be the only way to mitigate the inequitable aspect of all of this is to place those children, those neediest children, at the top of the list.
Okay. And Nancy, is that pretty similar, you think, for, I know you have, and we don't have to take final action here, so there'll be some time, and it's animated.
So I look at it, and I agree with Tim on everything he said, and I look at it this way, it's kind of what we do on the Start Time Task Force. One of our parameters is kind of what is best for the most.
Mhm.
Okay, so we have to figure out if we can't do a perfect plan for everyone, how do we harm the least number of
Right, and the
kids?
only caveat I would add from that, from one of my colleagues who has an MPA and talked about the Caldor-Hicks criterion when making public decisions, is we gotta make sure that if the ones who are harmed aren't consistently the ones who are harmed. Like in this decision,
Absolutely.
this is the group that gets harmed, and then this decision, it's the same group, and this decision, then you almost have to add that up a little bit and be honest that we know that it's not free and reduced lunch kids at our most crowded schools are the ones that won't have, well, they have to go to a lottery for full day kindergarten. If that's, yeah. No, I hear it, I'm just trying to process what we might call the least worst solution, and I'm getting to that. It seemed like one other,
Yeah, well,
yeah.
I'd like to say this in the interest of moving on, and I think this will help. So let me, and this is something I was gonna kind of wrap up.
I think someone else had a comment on it.
But hold on a second. So, in the interest of time, I just wanted to state, in case this does impact anyone's desire to state another comments, that today, it's not a nighttime meeting today, the purpose of this meeting is to gather a little more direction, to let Ryan and his team know, okay, should we go out and look for more portables? Should we start really thinking about sites? This is not the final board decision. The final board decision is January 12th. You know, we just need, because of the timing involved, we need to start narrowing the funnel. So at any point, whether it be a phone call, whether it be an email, whether someone wants to grab me in Safeway, and I'm sure I speak for everyone here, there's always opportunities for, if anyone thinks of something tonight or tomorrow, please, send thoughts our way. So in the interest of being able to start talking about this funneling of ideas that staff has asked the board for, I just wanted to state that that's what we will start doing next. If anyone does have something they really want to say, then we can definitely do that.
So I'll just reach out to you at a different time.
Absolutely, and whenever, I thank you for that. So, but still, is it appropriate to conclude comments? Okay, so let's think about doing that, guys. So again, if the purpose of today is to start narrowing, Kimberly did have a question that she wanted to pose, so I think a good thing to do is if that board members have any questions that they want to pose before we start taking a tally of what kind of funnel we're thinking. I think that's a great thing to do.
And I have another effective, before I go into that question, another effective or a positive thing that came from me looking at those videos is we talked exactly, all of us discussed exactly what Tim was talking about repurposing the portables, and I had forgotten about that conversation.
Yeah.
And so we had probably a 5-minute dialogue, Janet and Sandy and Dawn, Larry, Ryan, and we all talked about, can we use these to replace old portables? And we said the board said that's kind of one of the justifications why we would buy more in between the B and E plan. And that, I don't know that we exactly had a plan of how we were going to use them for afterwards, but Janet had said, can we replace our old one? So the board was in that dialogue, and I was happy to see that.
Okay.
So back to the resource teacher that
Yep.
I don't believe was a board directive, but was discussed at that meeting.
Right, so I can respond to that and I'll let others jump in. It was discussed in a limited sense of how we currently use resource teachers or how we may have to use resource teachers even under the best of circumstances in 16-17 at select schools. We also walked away with, again, this entire list of what we took away from that October 20th meeting with the board as kind of the general framework in which the board wanted us to continue to work on creating options or creating plans, melding some of the best elements of B and E. And so when you look at these, just a couple things I'll point out is one, we were under the impression again of sort of the old rules of full day K funding that we could only receive funding if we could offer to all students in the school. And that changed after that meeting when we got some additional information. And actually I would credit Nancy Young in our district for kind of prompting that conversation with some folks from OSPI. The other thing is, as we looked at these, again, they are in conflict with one another. So maximizing opportunities to implement state-funded full day K, when all of a sudden the rules changed for full day K, we did have this as a bullet point, minimizing additional moves, minimizing capital cost expenditures on portables. So I think it was all of those factors considered. That's why there are 4 options on the table. We were looking at what kinds of options, what kinds of alternatives can we offer to the board or can we explore or create, recognizing that each plan prioritizes these points differently. And this list, I believe, was one that I created right after that October 20th meeting. I think it was in my next e-news and connections letter where I sort of summarized what the board's discussion was. So these have been the same since that point in time and were communicated as kind of here's where we're going, albeit not very specifically, but just sort of in big picture what the board has asked us to look at. So that, I would say, was the reason that 3 and 4 came into being, and then certainly for the opportunity to could we find a way to get to full day kindergarten for all kids to address the equity issues that I think we all recognize are going to exist in any plan that doesn't offer state-funded full day K to all kids next year. With respect to the second part of the question of will we have the potential for resource teachers at some limited, in some limited places next year? I think the answer to that is yes. That even with plans 1 or 2, there may be 1 or 2 or a handful of schools where we cannot get to maintaining current class size ratios and find the required numbers of classrooms. We've had that before, we have that right now at one school that I'm aware of. But it would certainly not be at the scale that Plan 3 or 4 envisions. And again, just to reiterate what I said earlier, we've known that Plan 3 or 4 would require parent and staff support, and you have to kind of put the plan out there to get feedback on it until you can kind of know whether you have that. I don't believe we certainly have staff support. If Nancy's a fair barometer of parent support, then there's not parent support for that. So again, my recommendation would be that the board not proceed further with any consideration of plans 3 and 4 and focus your attentions around plans 1 and 2 and we move forward from there.
I have another question about the enrollment.
Yep.
So from the slide that we received on 10/13, and I have a copy if you wanted to see it, Ryan, and the slide that we received, or the slide that we're looking at now, on year 2016, it says for the elementary, there will be 11,892
Yep.
students, and that's changed to 12,087.
Yep.
But when you go back to year 2017, that 885 extra students kind of vanishes out of that number. So I'm wondering where those,
Out of the elementary, out of the elementary level?
Sixth grade.
where
So
did they
this
get,
is-
my question is, did all those get added to 6th grade then, when I'm,
They're up at middle
They're in middle school.
And then it's.
So they aren't gonna be
Are
at.
you asking why
Hold
the
on.
16-17 projections?
will you show that for,
Yeah.
We,
I
remember
think
we
she's
used,
just saying, she's saying the numbers in October are different than the numbers here,
Sure.
and it looks like
by
it's off.
185
So-
students?
So one of the things we continue to do after the October is two things. One is, right now, we experience a bump in 1st grade enrollment from kindergarten. So many families choose to keep their children in either private kindergarten placements, and then we see the kids in 1st grade. We wanted to be sure that, given the tightness of all these plans, that we were being as liberal as we felt was absolutely necessary to make sure that we didn't come up short in our classroom need projections for next
So
year.
it's the bump in the children that, the kids that we thought would be,
Partially.
okay.
So with perhaps more state-funded full-day kindergarten available in 16-17, we needed to presume that more families would opt to send their children into the public schools who might otherwise keep them in the private schools. The second thing, as I said, we wanted to do was to make sure that we were being sufficiently liberal in our enrollment projections across all grade levels, because particularly when you look at Plan 4, it is so tight and the margins are so narrow. If we miss the mark, even a little bit, there is very little backup capacity in that plan to create additional classrooms over the summer.
So I was just gonna ask for future board meetings, it'd be helpful to have the comparisons or where the changes were made for the future, just if we make changes
Like a
on
red
the
line
slide.
copy.
Yeah, just something that lets us know, because I could tell some that it wasn't the same. That'd be helpful. I'll have to go back and look for it all.
Did you? Awesome. I don't need to rush. I'll
No, that
Okay, I realized I jumped into my prompt of, I'm gonna kind of survey everyone to see what questions board members have at this point. So I'm gonna kind of let you ask your questions, Kimberly, and then maybe we'll go to Ken and David.
My questions were predominantly surrounding why we would move to 4 when resource teachers weren't ideal. So I'm thankful that I don't think that was the right option. I'm also thankful to all of you for, I know I was digging my heels in and saying I wanted to wait to make a decision. And I'm very thankful that you guys gave the board that opportunity because my decision is very different today than it was walking away and being pressed for a decision right away. So I just think that's important to give us the time to process that information. So I'm glad we're not looking at 3 or 4.
If I could just address that quickly, I will offer my apologies to the board if your sentiment on Tuesday was that you were being unduly pressured to land on a plan on Tuesday. My intent, and if I overdid it, I'll own that, is as Amy said, we know that this is an important issue to parents, particularly parents who are going to start registering their kids for kindergarten next month. We know this is an important decision for staff. It's an important operational decision as we look at all that's going to be involved in any of the plans, but particularly being able to secure the portables that we may need based on which plan we select. So my intent, my hope out of Tuesday's meeting is that if there was consensus around a plan or plans, that we could understand that clearly out of that meeting, both for planning purposes, moving forward with that, as well as for communication purposes out to parents and staff and all the other folks who are very interested in this topic. So if that felt unduly pressured, I own that and I extend my apologies to you for that.
Well, thank you, because it did. But I'm thankful that we all pushed back.
Is there anything else?
I think that's all the questions, because mine were regarding plans 3 and 4, or in plan 4.
Okay, thanks, Kimberly.
I guess what I'd like to ask is some comments, and then as we come back around to talk about 1 and 2 in more depth. I'm not exactly sure where,
Well,
or are we?
Oh, I was kind of, we can structure it whatever works for you, honestly, Ken. I wanted to make sure we had a time to ask questions before we started taking our thumbs up or down for a particular plan.
Well, I have comments before I'm going to be willing to put my thumbs up or
Well, we can do
down.
that.
So,
We can do
but I don't have as much questions as much comment. Okay.
Okay.
So, one of the things I want to state clearly is that I think the additional plans, my sense is that they were motivated by something that I don't think the discussion has had enough of, which is the value of full-day kindergarten. And I think as we was able to tease out that, and we all know that full-day kindergarten has pedagogical benefits, and especially for the opportunity gap that we're trying to close. And so that was clarified, kind of why full-day kindergarten now. That's an important issue, and it makes a difference to families. And so it's a very huge benefit to the families that get it when they're on half-day, and I think the research supports that. And so I think the efforts to find a way, especially when the state changed the thing, I think that's important, and that I'm not willing to give up yet. You guys may not be happy with me, but I'm not willing to give up yet on whatever creative ways that we can work out that meet everyone's needs, and since lots of people are here, to get that. If we can find ways with our current resource base to do it, I still think we should continue looking at that. So I want to say thank you for the plans, and then when you float the plans out there, you get the feedback, say, hey, that way to do it isn't going to work, but we're in December, and we don't start until September, and a lot of planning happens, but I want to get the money to the mission, I want to get resources to the mission. So that was number 1. Number 2, the slides available to the public. And so this is a comment on this one, but it's a global comment. And I think when we have a study session, the slides should be available both to the board and to the public in advance, 10-ish days. And we have a vibrant community and vibrant social media that gets a lot of questions and some kind of sentiment. And that really helps the board. We represent the taxpayers and the parents and the teachers and the principals and the bus drivers, and so getting that out there ahead of time, I think, really is beneficial. So from a transparency and a process, so putting the plan out there, and I think that was a fumble in some sense on this one, because the plan wasn't out there before we had our study session. And I'm not sure.
October 13th wasn't up either.
Right, and I understand how things move fast, but that's.
I agree.
You avoid some problems when you get that as soon as possible. In terms of 3, process issue, and I'm gonna say this because I think it's important no matter when and where we're doing, that we have lots of stakeholders and we need to improve, and part of the reason I ran for office and got elected to office, I think, is because I care about the process and listening to everyone on every issue. And so on this particular issue, one stakeholder group